Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the seminar series on cognitive robotics offered by QMUL University of London. Today we are very happy to have here Alexandre Bernardino from IST Lisbon, Instituto Superior Tecnico, where Alexandre is an associate professor. And he has been working for several years on cognitive robots and bio-inspired solutions for robots. And we can see here in the picture already several robots he has been working with. And I think especially will focus his presentation on the iCub, but also on all the friends the iCub found during his way. And I really like in all the research Alexandre has been doing that I think he has been able to combine very cleverly principles from engineering, signal processing, with ideas from biology and cognitive science. So to achieve also real applied results in robotics. And I think that's very notable. And I was very lucky to have the chance also to work with Alex in his group a few years ago, which was a wonderful experience. And the lab is a VisLab, Computer and Robot Vision Lab. And if you ever have had the chance in the future, I really encourage everyone to visit there and to get in touch, because it's a great place. And with this, I will just leave the floor to Alex for the presentation. Thank you, Alex, for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction, Lorenzo. It's really a great pleasure to be here to present my work and the work of the lab. And of course, part of the work is also yours, as you were with us for several years. And so the title of the talk is iCub and Friends. So it will focus mostly on the iCub, but also on some other humanoid robots that we have in the lab. So you know iCub for sure. And we have VZ, which was made by us, started in 2010. It's unique in the world. This is Balthazar, where I did my PhD, and we had a lot of work on this robot before the iCub. And this started in 2004. And then we have also other commercial robots. So these two here are Chico and Chica. So these were the early prototypes of the iCub when we were participating in the Robotica project. And some other commercial robots, newer robots that we are now using on the lab, both in humanoid form and other more like single arms, or a new one, very new one, the TEMI for social robotics. So I'm going to first give a brief presentation of the lab, okay, to let you know about many works that we do. Then I will focus on a topic which is on my favorites list, which is humanoid robot learning. And then in particular, I'll present examples of several approaches that we have been taking during the years for learning the self, the model of the robot itself, learning about interacting with objects, and learning about social skills. So this is the lab. The picture is quite, maybe not so recent. You can still recognize this guy here. And basically we are four professors in the lab, Jose, myself, Jorge Marques, and Jose Gaspar over there. And then we typically have also 4 or 5 postdoc researchers. Currently we have 6, and then a dozen or so of PhD students, and many master students, so they are not here, all of them. And you can also see here our robots in the middle of the people. Nowadays, the lab has more robots than people. We are currently also in lockdown. There's a very limited space in the lab, and we have at most 6 people in the lab at every time, and we have more than that in robots. So actually, I'm very happy today that the new lockdown discharge rules have come out from the government, and then next Monday, kindergartens, primary schools, and hairdressers will open. And I understand the hairdressers case because when I see the politicians on TV, they all look like Boris Johnson, so they really need hairdressers now. Okay, so our lab has been classically addressing topics that are on the computer and robot vision core, but also extend to learning, to biological inspiration, and image processing and video processing in general. And we have these main areas of research: bioinspired systems, where we study biological systems that have some interesting properties that can be exploited for engineering, but also we collaborate with neuroscientists trying to implement their models of biological systems in robots and trying to validate their hypotheses. And we also worked on different kinds of sensors, like the omnidirectional sensors, foveal vision that replicates human vision. We are now creating a biomimetic eye, tendon-driven, and we also study visual attention, visual search. So these are the main topics here in the bioinspired systems group. Then in cognitive robotics, we study topics on grasping, manipulation, self-calibration, human-robot interaction, and reinforcement learning. Also, we have had several projects more related to societal applications. In this one, Vizi was a coach, robot coach for people with motor disabilities. Then in image analysis and surveillance, we are typically interested in modeling human activities, both from the point of view of trajectories in an environment or their gestures and body postures, and also worked on re-identification, tracking. And there are also people working on medical imaging. And currently we have several projects on environmental monitoring, mainly for detection of forest fires and for the inspection of maritime environments. Then also we tackle some issues on visual navigation and calibration, visual odometry, ego motion, SLAM, and different types of systems that require excessive calibration. Okay, so here my favorite topics are on the cognitive robotics, and that's what I'm going to talk about, although there are also some projects that I'm running in other topics. Good. So I'm focusing today in humanoid robot learning, and this was a great inspiration for the iCub project, and also that's why the title of the talk is here, the iCub in the center. Is that so? The iCub was actually produced and developed having this idea in mind that it could replicate the stages of learning of humans since infancy. And so many of these things are on the root of the things that we do in the lab. And we are pretty interested in looking at the aspects of motor development. So maybe if you look at this diagram of development of children, so it's basically this line here that I'm going to talk today. So infants start grasping things on the ends, then playing with body, trying to mapping their sensory motor loops, then doing some social games, starting interacting with people, and so on. So of course, human development has all these dimensions and more. I think overall in the scientific community, we are just scratching still some of these things. It's pretty complex system, the human intelligence, and, but not only human, all animals adapt and learn and have to interact with very challenging and dynamic worlds. So what are here the main challenges in humanoid robot learning, and also challenges always bring opportunities that I can identify here and also relate to other types of learning that we have nowadays. So in computer vision, there is a lot of learning with large data sets, and they are doing all very exciting things. They can detect thousands of objects, label videos with captions, and this all is possible because there is a lot of data that has been captured during the years on these platforms, Facebook, Google, whatever. But in robotics, we don't have the access to such a huge amount of data, and in particular label data. Okay, so it's very hard in the robotics community to get nice label data of sensory motor loops. Okay, so we can label data that we get from sensors, but then all the dynamics of the embodiment and the interactions with the environment is very hard to label. And of course, this is a challenge, but then robots have this characteristic of multimodal sensing. So we have lots of sensors. And so we can think of self-supervision, okay? So by looking at the correlations that we have in the different sensors, we can kind of label or have redundant information that can be exploited for learning. Then we have also problems with noisy sensors, not only noisy sensors, but noisy actuators in very complex systems. Motions are not very smooth and not very precise. So we have to deal with probabilistic models. And actually, right now on the deep learning communities, people are talking about uncertainty, representing uncertainty in deep neural networks. But in robotics, we've been doing probabilistic robotics for much longer. And this is something that must be exploited even further. Then again, we have our systems are still fragile. Okay, so they cannot operate many hours consecutively doing many challenging tasks. I mean, maybe industrial robots can, but not the iCub and not other robots that we have in the lab. So we have really to be smart on what the data we should acquire. And so this is one advantage of robots with respect to other machine learning problems. Robots can choose, they can decide its own training data. Okay, so in certain scenarios, the robot can actually look at what it should do to gather most interesting information for learning, for improving its knowledge about the world. This is related to active learning. And so another challenge that robots must learn online, whereas these more common machine learning models, they learn in batches, they learn offline, they gather a lot of data, and then they learn at once. But robots, we want to use immediately the information that was gathered and update your model, and humans do that as soon as we have some change in our environment or in our perception. If we change the graduation of your glasses or something, you immediately or very quickly adapt. So you don't wait until the evening to start dreaming about that and adapt the other day. No, you adapt online. So we have to use these sequential learning methods that incorporate immediately the information on our models. And of course, we have to be very smart how to do it. So to prevent forgetting and to prevent destroying previous knowledge. And also we have large variability in the environments and tasks. Humanoids in particular are made with the human model in mind, that should be very general robots that should perform many tasks. And here, I mean, you have to look at how biological models work, and both from the point of view of the psychophysical experiments, but also in terms of neuroscience, and find out ways that allow these robots to generalize to multiple tasks. Okay, so my talk will be a kind of looking at these key features on robot learning, active learning, biological inspiration, multimodal sensing, online learning, self-supervision, to cook methods that enable robots to accomplish at least some of the stages or the early stages of the developmental route of human infants, on learning the self, learning interaction with objects, and learning some social skills. So by the way, if you want to ask any questions or interrupt me, just feel free, it's okay. Okay, so let's look at the first skill, learning the self. So, and here, the inspiration comes from robots having to perform very efficient tasks. So of course, whenever you want to execute some motor primitive, you can do it using a closed loop approach, where you are constantly monitoring the signal in your sensors and trying to correct your motions to achieve your goal. For instance, this robot here can oops, I have to change the So this robot has to move its finger to some point. Okay, so if it does it in open loop manner, okay, without closing the loop, it will get a large error, and then if it closes the loop, it can correct. But this happens because the model of the robot is imprecise, and when I use my actions in open loop, I cannot have a good precision. And this is critical in many cases where getting feedback to closed loops is hard. Okay, so it's still hard in robotics to really detect where are your ends, the fingertips, and all the details about your end to know where to put your ends with respect to some object. And in fact, this is the reason for many catastrophic failures, even with the very expensive robots in the DARPA Robotics Challenge. Whenever you have erroneous model of your cinematics, you are not placing your ends where it is supposed to be. Okay, and so the motivation is that a good model of the body of a robot is essential for motor planning and fast execution of actions in open loop, and the accuracy, of course, of the actions in open loop. Okay, so now I will present a formulation that is from Pedro Vicente in the picture. So he's a just submitted his thesis about 1 month ago. And he did work on estimating body schema for humanoid robots. And here the ingredients are the following. So there is some internal state on a robot, which is its proprioception. You can think of this as joint angles or some internal numeric representation of the body. And when our body in such configuration, we have sensors that are in some state, in some 3D pose of the world. And these sensors, through their interaction with the world, they receive sensory perceptions. Okay? And so this is what happens in the body of the robot. And now we want to create a modeling process that explains this chain of events going from proprioception to sensor position to sensory perceptions, so we can predict what happen when I perform some action, and based on this perform actions in open loop in a very efficient manner. And so this is typically represented as a function, which can be kinematics description of the robot, which we can do by using some neural network or use the typical Danavi-Tartenbach parameters that, given this proprioception and a set of parameters that we want to estimate to have a good model of our body, then performs a transformation that gives me the position of these sensors. And then, having a sensor model, I can create an expectation of what my sensor is going to observe. And then, based on this expectation, I can compare with my actual sensory perception. And using a loss function that may depend on the type of sensors, may depend on the assumptions on our problem, we'll measure the perceptual incongruence, which is the difference or some distance, some metric of error between what I expect and what is my actual sensory perception. Okay? And so the objective here is to continuously adapt this parameter vector by using information coming from this loss in order to minimize it. Okay, so we want to minimize sensor incongruence. We want to have all our sensors be coherent and be matching in their predictions of the world. And if we can manage this, then we'll have a good body schema. So this is the general model. Now Pedro specified this for different types of observations. Okay, so here the sensor model is quite important, because in the end that's where your feedback comes from. And so we formulated the problem in two types of sensors, and depending on these types of sensors, then the solutions to learn the body schema will be different. So in the Gaussian sensors, so we call Gaussian sensors the sensors where we can model the noise, and the noise is a Gaussian. And he has made experiments and some results on using visual key points of, in particular, the fingertips and the finger joints of an hand. And here the loss function is simply the subtraction between our expected perception and our current perception. And also Alexandre Almeida, he made an algorithm to segment the end of the robot using deep neural networks. And here also you can get the fingertips on the extremities of the blob and also use them to try to learn to create a loss function that is able to then adapt to the weights. Then also in this class of sensors, but using a different principle for the adaptation of the body schema. So this was made by Rodrigo Zenha in his MSc. I don't know if it's around. Yeah, it is. So he worked on touch constraints. So in this case, the robot touches some planar surfaces in the world, and then planar surfaces don't give you an exact observation. They give you a constraint, and here the constraint, the loss function, is the distance to the plane that you measure when you create this loss here. Okay? So F is in fact the 3D position of the fingertip using your current body model, and this operation creates the distance to the plane. Of course, we assume that the plane parameters N and D can be computed by any other means, by vision, by using markers or whatever. Then Pedro also formulated the problem for non-Gaussian sensors. So non-Gaussian sensors, we don't know the noise model, and so we model this likelihood of the sensor given the current parameters as a distribution of the exponential family on a distance function. Okay, this zk now, the sensor incongruency is a distance function between current observation and an image. So F now is the sensor prediction, is predicting an image using a graphical simulator, and then from the graphical simulator you can get some measurements, in this case edges, and compare to the edges of the real image and create a distance transform image that measures the distance, let's say, between the image that is predicted and the image that is actually observed. So for these different types of sensors, then there are different methods that are used to estimate the parameters. And as I mentioned before, so we want to estimate online these parameters, and whenever possible, we want also to estimate the uncertainty of the parameters, the covariance matrices of the parameters. And so we are using the extended Kalman filter for the Gaussian sensor case, where the model for the parameters is of slow drift. So parameters are typically constant, but due to wear, temperature, load on the robot, they may change slowly. So we allow for some noise with some covariance that represents this adaptation of the parameters with time. And so here are typical equations for the extended Kalman filter, the predict and the update steps. And here the thing that we have looked at in more detail is on the ability of determining which observations are good or bad for the estimate. Okay, so in some cases there is lack of observations, of observability in our measurements. Whenever a measurement is not informative about our parameters, then we may have a problem. And this happens basically when this derivative of the loss function with respect to parameters is very low. So this means that a change on the parameters is not changing our observation. Okay, and then the effect of this is that our covariance, so S is the covariance of our innovations, is the observation noise, And so the covariance of our parameters is very low here and is not going to compensate for the growth of the covariance in the predict step. And the covariance grows and makes the process unstable. So one thing that Rodrigo Zanya also looked was to several approaches that could tackle this problem. So as I mentioned before, he was working on the problem of calibrating or correcting the body schema by exploiting contacts on the environment. So here the robot is actually making purposeful contacts for the purpose, but this can be used also by exploiting natural contacts while the robot is performing other tasks. But as contacts are exploited, so it's possible to estimate or update our model. And here we can see that typical Kalman filter can have problems and not achieve a very good estimate. And here are different methods that allow to either select and choose which samples are good to make the estimation, or do some other transformations on the covariance matrices to stabilize the process. Okay, so let me move, time is ticking. Another interesting aspect of robot learning is this aspect of actively selecting the samples. And here, Gonçalo Cunha looked at this problem of where to move your body to extract the most information to learn your model. So here, the observations are given by these markers on the Aruco, and by, again, using the Alexandre Kalman filter, we were able to reduce more effectively the error on the parameters of our model by using a purposeful active learning approach rather than a random movement approach. So here the basic principle is to realize what is the configuration of parameters that reduce as most the covariance. And then I think there is a problem of notation here. Here these theta's are the joint angles of the robot and not the parameters. So we are selecting what joint angles are the most informative for the robot to learn. There is another innovation here, which is there is an extra term that also penalizes big movements of the arm. Okay, and so the robot not only selects good new positions for moving the arm, but also positions that are not too far away from the current position, and so it can also minimize the energy, the path length, the accumulated path length on this process. So here you can see that we can reach lower values on the error and also lower movements in the whole process. Then finally, for non-Gaussian sensors, Pedro has proposed the method based on particle filters. Okay, so in non-Gaussian sensors, our posterior, so our probability density function of the parameters given our observations is not Gaussian, and we don't know exactly what it is. So we don't have a parametric form for this density function. We have a form based on samples. Okay, so we have samples that are more frequent in locations on the parameter space that are have high likelihood and have less particles, let's say, in other positions, and also these particles are weighted. Okay, so to give a notion of the likelihood of some hypotheses. Okay, so we have to represent this distribution with many hypotheses, and you can think of these hypotheses as possible visualizations of a hand given some set of parameters of our body configuration. So it's like the robot is imagining many different possibilities for its end appearance that then can compare each one of them with the current image and create here the typical steps of the particle filter that create this set of hypotheses that converge to the high likelihood regions of the parameter space. So what you can see here is the imagination of the robot when we are not adapting the parameters or when we are adapting. So in fact, this is the most likely particle in this particle filter. And so you can see that quickly you converge to a nice estimation of the configuration of the end. Because this is a particle filter, there is some variance. Sometimes, yeah, there's a particle that gets a higher error. But so overall, the distribution is a set of particles, and then the estimates are made by doing averaging, and this works pretty well. Okay, so I'm looking that I'm running out of time, so maybe I won't have time for everything that I wanted to say. Anyway, let me delve into this topic of object affordances, because it's also one of my favorite topics. And let me give you the motivation for the problem. And the motivation is the following. We want to operate with objects. We want to perform actions with objects. And for that purpose, we have to know what objects are good for. So what are their affordances? And so their typical approach nowadays is to look at an object, use image recognition, object detectors to recognize the object, and then having the properties of the object or the identification of the object, we go to some database that tells me that this class of objects is good for something. This has a lot of problems because this limits you to perform actions on objects that you know, that you can recognize. And this is not actually what happens in the human brain. So in the human brain, there are, of course, circuits that allow object recognition, which are on the ventral stream of the brain or the what stream. And there is a different stream, which is the where or how stream, dorsal stream, that look at the objects from the point of view of the affordances, what they afford to. And it does not require recognition. And in fact, this stream, the dorsal stream, is much faster than the recognition stream. And so we can have more efficient algorithms to decide how to operate with objects by adopting this different approach. And so here are some videos that I've shown this many times. Maybe you have seen them before, but I don't resist showing them because they really exhibit in a funny way the nature of object affordances and this characteristic that allows people to be very quick on operating with objects. And so in this one here, you can see we have a cardinal that is talking to the microphone. And then suddenly he starts doing something quite different that you're supposed to do with the microphone. But because the microphone shares very similar properties with another object, this creates kind of automatic response that I think it shows this shortcut ability of the affordances to operate with objects. This is also quite funny. Let me stop this one. So this guy was stopped by the police while driving the car and is asked to below to the alpha meter, but the alpha meter is quite a shape that triggers other affordances on these people. So we have worked for many years on this problem of learning affordances, and our paradigm is for self-exploration. So robots or babies, the robots play with different objects, and also I have extended this with language. So the quotes, the subtitles you see there are narrations that users are doing that we then used to associate the characteristics of the objects to the language. And we have also exploited this paradigm in tools, tool learning, where robots exploit interactions with objects, but holding tools, which extends the motor repertoire of the robots. So here you see data sets that we have acquired in the last decade for experimenting on learning the operation with tools. Okay, so again, formulation. We need to formulate these problems rigorously and in this case also probabilistically to be able to characterize uncertainty and be able to learn efficiently using online. And this was the work of Luis a few years ago, many years ago already, where object affordances were modeled as relationships between actions, object features, and effect characteristics. So you can think of object features as shape, curvatures, colors, weights, whatever, and effects you can think of movements of objects or collisions or sounds. And so by having a robot exploring the environment and manipulation with objects, we can create a probabilistic model that represents the co-occurrence between all these things, from which then we can do many things. So we can then, if we want to know the likelihood of any of these entities given the others, we can just marginalize this probability distribution. And so we can, for instance, decide which action we should use to achieve some effect on an object, okay? And then choose the maximum likelihood action. So this was then so learning was done with Bayesian networks. So this is a very powerful method to represent the probability distributions and actually also representing uncertainty in a very nice way. And so this goes into steps. So in this case, these were the features of the objects that you're using, color, shape, and size. These were the effects, and the action is discrete label. And so a fully connected network doesn't make sense. So there is a structured learning process where you really first learn which features actually have a causal influence in the others, and these are different alternatives. And after you're learning these causal relationships, then you can learn parameters that reflect the probability density function. This was extended in a number of ways. So Afonso Gonçalves here extended this for tools. So now we have action, effects, the acted object, but now also we have the manipulator, so the part of the tool that interacts with the object. And again, a different number of models were tried, and one based on PCA decomposition of the features of the objects and the tool was the one that provided better generalization behavior. So the robot can use tools even if it haven't seen them before. Then another interesting work was done by Giovanni. So he looked at the correlation that exists on the shape of ends when we perform different actions on objects and the shape of tools. So by learning manipulation actions with the ends and understanding what are the effects of objects when actions are made with different end configurations, then the robot can actually choose tools that achieve similar effects. And yeah, because we are in the era of deep learning, so now we are also exploiting models that are based on deep learning, but as we want always to keep track of uncertainty, to be able to do active learning or to characterize uncertainty properly. So Atabak is doing variational autoencoders to be able to make this learning, the relationships between actions, objects, and effects, and also then to relax the network on the solutions whenever you want to make a query. Okay, so what the action that best works on this circumstance of what object should I select to achieve some effect. Okay, so because we are talking about tools and learning, so this is a work that was done by Jezok Kim that I'd like to show you, and this illustrates nicely the combination of sensory motor skills, imitation learning. So if you allow me, this is a video. I don't think the sound is interesting, but so here the purpose is to clean a table. So the robot has a sponge and has to clean a table, and so there is an initial phase where there are given some demonstrations to the robot. These demonstrations are then corrected to a top view of the table, and then a neural network learns to associate the image of the dirt on the table to motor primitives that are used to clean the table. So basically the robot then can, in a new scenario, look at the dirt spots on the table and make a plan on what are the via points, suitable via points to move its arm in order to clean the scribbles. Of course, not always this works at the first time, as in reality. So you may need to clean or pass the sponge several times on the table, but after each pass, the robot then looks again at the dirt pattern and executes again the motion until it cleans the table. So here the challenge is where to stop. So the robot is a compulsive cleaner. He cannot yet decide when to stop. He always checks some dirt spot on the table, and it seems that is a very challenging cognitive skill when to stop something. Okay, so I need now some advice from Lorenzo. So I could stop here and go to the conclusions because I realize it's already quite late, and probably I will do that.
Yeah, maybe. If you wanna, yeah, I think maybe it might be better to wrap up and then get some questions, and maybe if we have more time, we can ask you something else about the interactions. Maybe. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. So I'll skip the interactions. Typically, the interactions were also doing some inference on Bayesian networks and extending the model of the affordances to other features. Okay, so to wrap up, this idea that there are different stages in robot learning is paradigm that I follow, and try to reuse models and approaches and paradigms to approach all of them. But still, of course, there are very hard problems to look at. So how can we unify all these stages of learning, or even if they can be developed in parallel? We need some sequencing from one state to the other. So how to determine if one stage is mature enough to move to the next one? So this is very still challenging and hard to tackle. And there are here several theoretical challenges. So the scale and the complexity of our models, of our environments, of our robots is still also difficult. So we can do with deep learning now tackle problems of very large complexity, but to represent the uncertainty properly, it's not that easy, because uncertainty covariance matrices are quadratic in the number of parameters, and we are still limited to not many parameters. Then this issue of stabilizing learning. So how to understand when learning or the samples that we get are not destructive. This is also challenging. I think Rodrigo Zenya did a nice exploration, but there are more challenging cases that we still have to explore. And then biological findings, of course, can help and give structure and prior information to reduce the complexity, but how to formulate the structure is still challenging. And then there are also practical challenges. So our research platforms and materials are quite different from biology. They suffer from intense usage and break more often and cannot self-repair. There is a lack of data sets and benchmarking tools, because, I mean, there are not many people having common robots in the world, and so it's hard to create critical mass of experiments to really leverage from it. And so you may have seen that many of our work is done in graphical simulators or physical simulators. These are great because you can do a lot of experiments, but these are still not matching very well the reality. So we could also do some investment and more research on having better physical simulators, in particular modeling contexts and impacts. Okay, thanks a lot. I hope you enjoyed. I'm available for questions now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alex. Yes, I think that was very enjoyable. At least I enjoyed. So, right, is there any question from the audience? Ivan?
Yes, hello, Alex. Thank you very much for the interesting presentation. I just have a couple of questions. That schema you showed, the block diagram, are you essentially learning models with that?
Yeah. Yeah. So of course things are more complex than this. Yes. But so what we are learning is the parameter of the kinematics, let's say, of the robot. We could also learn some parameters of the sensor, some calibration parameters of the sensor. That could also be done, because just an extension of the set of parameters that you want to learn. And it's just kinematics, so we are not tackling yet the dynamics or making predictions based on the dynamics, but we believe that this internal body state given by proprioception is something that is common to many sensors. So you can extend this approach by having many sensors, many sensory perceptions. And this proprioception, in fact, types all of them, and is a common source for minimizing this incongruence between the different sensors.
So if you had to map this to a Kalman filter type setup, like you actually use later on, so would the internal state be the state vector in a Kalman filter? And then the body model is the prediction model, and the sensor model is the measurement model, for example.
So here we are estimating the parameters. So this is a Kalman filter for parameter estimation.
Oh, okay, you're running it.
Yeah. So here the model for the, so the parameters, so the state here are the parameters, and the transition model for the parameters is a slow drift.
Right. You're not learning to predict the state then, just the parameters, like the covariances.
Yeah. So the idea is that if these parameters are the parameters are a proxy to estimate the state then. Okay. So once you have the parameters, you can then from your proprioception infer the state here represented as this X. So let's say it's
so essentially you've built a predictive, adaptive Kalman filter, I would say. That
maybe
right.
Yeah. So so here instead of estimating the state, we estimate the proxy of the state, which are the parameters. So parameters are the state is the output of this block here, and instead of estimating the state of the output, we estimate the parameters instead, which is a simpler problem. But I mean, it also has these issues of lack of observability, and we have to be careful with which measurements we should use on the estimation.
Well, so you're essentially limiting the subset of models you can use via this parameterization, presumably.
Yeah, so this allows me to put some structure here. So if I have the kinematic structure of the robot, I can define this model as the Danavit-Artenberg parameters, the length of the links, the angles where you attach the links. But if we are not sure about the kinematic structure, or if it is a soft robot or something else, we can use more general models like neural networks. And if we keep the number of parameters on the neural networks limited, we can still use the second order, the Kalman filter method, and estimate covariances. So the problem is just in estimating the covariance is just dimension of the parameter space. If there are many parameters, then we'll end up with huge covariance matrices and become computationally challenging.
Yeah, I see. Thank you. Can I just ask? I see Pedro's just submitted his thesis on this topic. Is it possible to see a preliminary copy, or has it not been uploaded yet?
Well, Lorenzo is a supervisor also, so he should be able to share.
There are several publications. Please get in touch. I can send some publications, or Alex can send you, of course.
Thanks, Lorenzo. I'll be in touch with you about that.
Thank you.
And just one final thing on your so the particle filter that you showed.
Yeah.
What is the novelty there? Because it's, I mean, surely it's not the first time a particle filter has been applied to non-Gaussian sensors.
No.
Have you actually synthesized a different design for the particle filter, or have you developed your own particle filter?
Well, there are a couple of things when is in the proposal function. We also use the current image information to get a better set of particles. But I mean, I wouldn't say it's a big innovation, but in computer vision, typically your proposal is just based on the prediction model. So you run the transition model and you move your particles according to the transition model. Here we also use the current image to have a better proposal, and so we sample closer to the true posterior, which is good to reduce the number of particles. And I think that the biggest innovation here, I think, is on the likelihood function that we use for these non-Gaussian sensors. So Pedro has looked at several ways of computing values for the likelihood when you have natural images, full images. So if you have two full images, how do you compute the likelihood of so one of the images is given by the graphical simulator that puts the end of the robot in some position, and now you have your true image. So how to compute a similarity between these two images is not trivial because you have background clutter. The simulator is obviously not perfect, and the best way he did was by using this distance transform image that basically, so this is the edge image of the real image, but the edge image of the simulator will be out of these other contours. But this distance transform is quite robust to contours that are very far from the real ones. And so it gets some intrinsic robustness to the process, because otherwise it's very hard to get a good distance between images.
Right, thank you.
Thank you, Alex. And Kaspar?
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Alex, for the very nice presentation. I also like the work that you did on affordances, some nice videos there. You said at some point that, one of the problems in that research area is that you focus very much on known objects, and you have your training methods. But how do you generalize? Are you able to do that now? Are you able to go beyond what is just in your training set?
Yeah. So basically, we don't use any ID or any recognition of the features of the object. So we don't detect handles or cups or containers, or so we just use features that are very general. So are based on shape, like curvatures, Euler numbers, so the number of holes in the objects, ratios of areas to enclosing boxes. So there is a set of computational geometry features that are very general, that are highly correlated to the ability to grasp an object, or if it is elongated, or if it is round. And these generalize much better than features that are for recognition. So imagine you want to stir your coffee, but you don't have a spoon, right? So in a classical robot approach, you are going to try to classify the objects in your table, but you don't have an object called spoon. So you won't be able to stir your coffee. But if you use this approach that basically checks for elongated objects, maybe with some curvature on the tip, maybe you can use a pen or some other elongated object that you have there. Eventually, any object that you've never seen before, but you know it's elongated, so it has the right size, it could be used to stir the coffee. So this is the mindset here.
Okay, very good. And have you tried this on untrained data or objects?
Yeah. In particular, in the case of tools, maybe I don't have exactly the examples here, but yeah, so I'm pretty sure that maybe here in this case, yeah. So we have test objects that haven't been seen before.
Okay.
So that were not used for training.
Very nice.
So
yeah. Thanks a lot. If there's time, I could quickly ask me another question. on the very first few slides, you mentioned your bio-inspired vision system. Would you be able to say a bit more about that? Further up, further to the, yeah, even, I mean, so it's not really maybe your area there, this one on the top middle.
Yeah, this one here.
No, the one on the
this one.
Oh, I don't know.
Fovea.
You said you had something, I did not quite understand, but it was biomimetic vision system.
Yeah. So the human eyes have a distribution of a certain type of photoreceptors that is higher density in the center and lower in the periphery, and we can experience that. So when we want to recognize an object, we have to move the center of our vision to that particular object, and of course this demands for ocular motions. Okay, so when we are trying to recognize a scene, we have to move this high resolution fovea to different parts of the environment. And this is a much more efficient way of processing information than having a full resolution image with very high density all over. And there are some studies that estimate that our visual cortex would be so large that our brain would need, I don't know, maybe 20 tons. Our brain would weigh 20 tons to be able to process all the information from our eyes if the resolution is identical in the whole retina to what it is in the center. And so this is a natural mechanism to reduce latency in computations and to make efficient vision. And so this was the topic of my PhD, and we are still doing research on how to use these sensors to make more efficient visual tasks, how the deep learning object detectors work on this kind of representations. So it's still not a widely used sensor because it's not very cheap in the first place. So normal cameras are not done for robots, are done for taking pictures. Yeah. But we hope to highlight some interesting properties here on this type of visual sensors.
So I suppose the main message here is instead of having a super high resolution all across, have a motor that moves the thing around.
Yeah. You trade off resolution by time, basically, because you have to move. Instead of capturing the image all at once, you have to capture several images.
Time as well, but also extra actuation. You need a motor or something.
And actuation, yes.
Thank you. Very, very interesting. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot. Let me see if there is any question in the chat. I don't see any at the moment. Maybe I will ask just, I had a few, but maybe I will ask just one question, Alex. I was interested in the active learning part of the body schema. And you mentioned that you select actively the samples that will reduce the covariance. So I was wondering how much, so if those samples, so do you have the information on whether, so do you have a function that will tell you what is the covariance for a certain input region of the space that you explore? Or otherwise, do you, let's say, estimate it on the part of the space that you have explored? And can you guess about parts of the space that you haven't explored?
Yeah, so most of these active learning approaches are based on proxy functions that, for instance, Gaussian processes that you update and that try to model the real function on the world. So it's a kind of an interpolation of what can happen, right? So whenever you get some samples, you know about what happens in that part of the space, and as you move to other parts of the space, you can make predictions and improve your prediction of what could happen in other parts of the space. And so it's based on this proxy function that in this case is estimating the covariance that you can then search very efficiently because it's an internal model, is in a computer, you don't have really to move your limbs. You can search in efficient ways. So in case of Gonçalo Cunha used the black box optimization method called Direct, that is a global optimization method that is very fast and can give you the point that
is that similar to Bayesian optimization, or it's fundamentally
yes?
No, it's similar.
Yeah. So this is Bayesian. This is Bayesian optimization.
Okay.
So here, what Gonçalo extended was this path length. So we want informative measures, but also efficient in terms of energy and displacement. For instance, imagine you have to explore here, there, and there. Okay, so the sequence may be more efficient. So instead of going from one point to the other and come to the middle, you can go first to the middle and then to the other place.
So you take into consideration the fact that to measure, the robot has to physically move from one point to the other, and you want to, let's say, also minimize that or take that into consideration. Yeah, I think that's very
exactly. And he had also two interesting things here that I didn't mention, but that are also important. One is to learn poses where the marker is visible.
Okay.
Because you can waste your effort moving your arm to some position, but then if the marker is not visible, you waste one sample. I think he made some extra.
And that one, so basically you try to favor poses in which the marker is visible. So let's say to estimate a manifold in which the marker is always visible.
So I think he learned here a binary model, a beta. It's also kind of a process, a beta binomial process that he can use to predict the likelihood of the marker being visible for a certain configuration.
Okay. So that's not explicit in the cost, but it's
it is. I didn't put the formulas here, but you can put it on the cost.
Okay.
There is some weighting, also some weighting term.
Okay.
So this is, you can see it on archive. We have submitted to Humanoids, but you can see this on archive.
Yeah. I will have a look. Okay. I think we got a bit late, so I will probably close it here. Thank you so much. It was very interesting, and it's always a pleasure to see you. I will.
Thank you.
So I will close now the session. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending.
Thanks.